The morning had started like any other for Tanya. The sun was just rising, painting the small neighborhood in soft gold light. The streets were waking up slowly. People were walking their dogs. Cars were making their usual morning hum, and the smell of fresh bread and coffee from Tanya's cafe was beginning to drift through the air. Tanya loved mornings like this. She loved the quiet before the day fully took over. The way the city seemed calm and kind for a few hours. It gave her a sense of control, a feeling that things could be peaceful if she handled them right. Her cafe was small but cozy, filled with mismatched chairs and tables that had been collected over the years. There were plants hanging in the corners, and the shelves behind the counter were stacked with jars of homemade jams, teas, and a few baked goods she had made herself. People often said it felt like stepping into someone's living room, warm and personal. Tanya had worked hard to make it that way. She had put in long hours, painted walls herself, and even hand-carved little signs for the menu. She took pride in the space she had built with her own hands, a space where people could feel safe and welcomed. It was a Thursday morning, and she was behind the counter wiping down tables and arranging pastries when she noticed a commotion outside. At first, it was just a few murmurs, a couple of neighbors pointing and whispering. Tanya's curiosity was immediate. Something felt off. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped to the window, looking out. That's when she saw him. He was tall, broad, and muscular, dressed in black leather from head to toe, his jacket covered in patches that marked him as part of a notorious motorcycle club. His hair was long, and his face, though weathered, carried a strange kind of intensity. Police officers were surrounding him, their hands on their belts, voices raised. The man was trying to explain something, gesturing with his hands, but the officers seemed impatient and aggressive. A crowd had begun to gather, people keeping their distance but watching closely. Tanya could feel the tension in the air, heavy and electric. Her heart started beating faster. She knew stepping in could be dangerous. Anyone could see this man as trouble just by looking at him. She had heard stories about people in his world, about how dangerous they could be, how fast things could escalate. But there was something in the way he carried himself, the way he tried to stay calm despite the officer's pressure, that made Tanya pause. She could see he wasn't looking for a fight. He was just trying to handle a situation he didn't want to be in. Tanya made a choice in that moment. She opened the cafe door and stepped outside, her voice strong but calm. "Hey, back off," she said. "This is my property and I won't let you escalate things here." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight she hadn't expected. People turned their heads, surprised by her sudden intervention. The officers looked at her like she had just grown wings and spoken with authority that they hadn't expected from a woman standing in a cafe doorway. The biker, glanced at her with a mixture of relief and surprise. Tanya gestured for him to come inside, to get out of the line of sight of the officers. "Come on," she said. "You can wait inside. You're safe there." He hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the police, then nodded and followed her into the cafe. The atmosphere inside immediately felt different. It was quieter, warmer, a stark contrast to the tension outside. Tanya showed him to a seat near the window, offering him water and a chance to breathe. The man, whose name she would soon learn was Dante, took a slow breath and sank into the chair. He ran a hand over his face, and Tanya noticed the weariness in his eyes. He looked like someone who had been carrying too much weight for a long time, someone who was used to people judging him before they even knew him. Tanya felt a strange connection in that moment, an instinctive understanding that people were often more than the labels society put on them. As she brought him a glass of water, she spoke softly. "You're okay now. You're safe here." Her words were simple, but she meant them. She wanted him to feel that, even for a few minutes, someone wasn't seeing him as danger or threat. Dante looked at her, eyes narrowing slightly as if evaluating whether she could be trusted. Then slowly he nodded. It was a small gesture, but it carried a lot of meaning. He was choosing to trust her, and she wasn't going to let him down. The cafe started filling up with the normal morning crowd, people coming in for coffee and breakfast, but something had changed. There was a buzz of curiosity, a subtle energy that hadn't been there before. Some of the regulars whispered, their eyes flicking to Dante. Others just continued with their morning routine. But Tanya noticed them all, noticing the tension, the shift in the room. She stayed calm, moving behind the counter, preparing coffee, taking orders, all while keeping an eye on Dante. He seemed to relax a little as the minutes passed. He didn't speak much at first, just sipped his water and looked around, taking in the cozy atmosphere. Tanya decided not to ask too many questions. She knew that trust was built slowly, not forced. Instead, she focused on small gestures, making him feel like part of the cafe, part of a space that was different from the world outside. At one point, Dante looked out the window at the street where the officers were still lingering. His jaw tightened and Tanya could see the tension returning. She stepped closer and said quietly, "You don't have to worry about them right now. They won't come in here." She placed a hand gently on his shoulder. He looked at her, a mix of surprise and gratitude in his eyes. For the first time that morning, he allowed himself a small, weary smile. Tanya knew this was risky. She knew people might talk and some might even be angry at her for stepping in. But she also knew something else. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting despite it. She had seen enough in life to know that sometimes the right thing wasn't easy or safe, but it was necessary. And in that moment, helping Dante felt like the right thing. As the morning went on, Dante slowly started to share pieces of his story. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He just wanted someone to listen without judging. He told Tanya about the challenges he faced being part of a world that was often misunderstood, how people assumed the worst about him before they knew him. Tanya listened, nodding, offering small comments of understanding. She didn't rush him or push for more than he was ready to share. The cafe became a small sanctuary that morning, a place where two very different worlds briefly intersected. Tanya continued her work, serving pastries and coffee to her regulars, while also keeping an eye on Dante, making sure he felt safe. The normal hum of conversation, the clinking of cups, and the smell of fresh coffee created a bubble around them, shielding them from the chaos outside. By the time Dante stood to leave, the police had finally moved on, their interest apparently lost in the face of Tanya's firm presence. He looked at her with a kind of respect that went beyond words. "Thank you," he said simply. Tanya nodded, understanding that no explanation was needed. She had done what she felt was right, and that was enough. As he walked away, she watched him mount his motorcycle and ride off down the street. The engines roared, the wind whipping through the morning air, and Tanya felt a mix of relief and something else she couldn't quite name. She had stepped into a moment of fear and uncertainty, and had come out with a sense of connection, a reminder that bravery sometimes came in quiet, unexpected ways. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of customers and chores, but Tanya couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She didn't know what the future held, or if Dante would return, but she felt certain that the day had left a mark, not just on her, but on her cafe and the world around it. She had discovered that courage and compassion could create ripples in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes standing up for someone else could change everything. The morning after the incident, Tanya woke up with a strange mixture of excitement and unease. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened the day before. The memory of Dante, the Hell's Angel sitting in her cafe while the police lingered outside, replayed in her mind over and over. She had done what she believed was right, but a part of her wondered about the consequences. She knew people could gossip, and in a small neighborhood, news traveled fast. Yet there was also a sense of pride that she had stepped in when no one else would. She had protected someone in need, even if the world saw him as a threat. By the time Tanya arrived at her cafe, the streets were busier than usual. The air carried a soft chill, and the smell of fresh bread from the local bakery mingled with the aroma of coffee brewing from her cafe. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, taking a moment to look around. Everything seemed normal, but the quiet buzz of expectation hung in the air. Something had shifted, she could feel it. Customers came in, giving her cautious smiles. Some whispered to each other, casting curious glances toward her, and she could sense the neighborhood talking about the events of the previous day. Tanya began her morning routine, preparing the counter, arranging pastries, and making coffee. As she worked, she noticed that the staff were more alert than usual. They had seen the tension yesterday and were clearly still thinking about what had happened. Tanya reassured them with small gestures, a smile here, a nod there, telling them everything would be fine. She knew that confidence was contagious, and if she stayed calm, they would too. It wasn't long before Dante appeared again. He rode slowly down the street, scanning the area before finally parking near the cafe. Tanya watched him through the window, her heart skipping a beat. This time there was no police around, and the streets felt quiet in comparison to yesterday. She opened the door to greet him and he nodded a small, respectful acknowledgement. There was no tension, only the faint weight of curiosity and a growing sense of mutual understanding. Inside, Dante took a seat by the window once more. Tanya offered him coffee and this time he accepted it without hesitation. She noticed that he seemed more relaxed today, as if yesterday's events had brought some relief. Tanya felt a cautious optimism. She realized that this wasn't just about protecting someone from authority. It was about understanding someone whose world she had never known. She was stepping into unfamiliar territory and there was a strange sense of discovery in it. Dante began to speak, slowly and carefully. He explained parts of his life, not with pride, but with a matter-of-fact tone. He told her about the challenges of being judged by appearances, about the constant struggle to maintain loyalty and trust in a world that often misunderstood him. Tanya listened intently, offering quiet encouragement, her presence a steady reassurance. She didn't interrupt or judge. She simply allowed him to share, letting the words flow naturally without any rush. As Dante spoke, Tanya began to notice the layers beneath his rough exterior. There was a code to the way he lived, a strict sense of loyalty to his friends and family. He had made choices that the world might never understand, but they were choices grounded in a sense of respect and honor within his circle. Tanya felt a mixture of awe and empathy. It was a reminder that people were rarely one-dimensional, and that there was often more to someone than what met the eye. Meanwhile, the cafe began to fill with the usual morning crowd. People came in for their coffee and breakfast, and some glanced at Dante with cautious curiosity. Tanya moved seamlessly between serving her customers and keeping Dante comfortable. Her ability to manage both worlds, the calm routine of her cafe and the unexpected presence of a man from such a dangerous world, was impressive. She realized that courage wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and persistent. Word of the previous day's events had already begun to circulate through the neighborhood. Some people admired Tanya's bravery, whispering to each other about how she had stood up to authority and protected someone in need. Others were skeptical, wondering if it had been wise to intervene. Tanya didn't concern herself with opinions. She focused on what she could control, creating a space where people could feel safe, whether they were customers, staff, or someone like Dante. As the morning wore on, Dante started to share stories from his past. He spoke of friendships formed on the road, of loyalty tested under pressure, and of moments when he had to make hard choices for the sake of those he cared about. Tanya listened with a growing sense of respect. She could see that despite appearances, Dante was guided by principles that were rare and profound. He wasn't perfect and he had made mistakes, but his honesty about them was striking. Tanya felt a connection forming, one built not on similarity, but on mutual recognition of humanity. She realized that courage and kindness often came from unexpected places, and that sometimes standing by someone in a moment of vulnerability could create bonds stronger than years of casual acquaintance. She felt that bond growing, subtle and quiet, but undeniable. Throughout the morning, Tanya also noticed small gestures from Dante. He was careful not to disturb the cafe, respectful toward her staff, and surprisingly attentive to the customers around him. It was a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, and that character often revealed itself in the small, seemingly insignificant actions. Tanya smiled quietly to herself, noting how much more there was to this man than the world would ever assume. The police had been absent that morning, but Tanya could sense the lingering tension from yesterday. She knew they might return, and she also knew that her intervention had not gone unnoticed. The weight of responsibility pressed lightly on her shoulders. She made sure her staff felt reassured, walking them through small measures to maintain safety and calm. It was a delicate balance, but Tanya had a natural ability to manage it. As the day progressed, Dante shared more personal thoughts. He spoke of family, of regrets, of moments when he had felt completely alone. Tanya offered empathy without judgment, providing the simple comfort of someone truly listening. She realized that this was as much about human connection as it was about protection. Sometimes people needed someone to stand with them, to validate their existence without fear or prejudice. The cafe, once a quiet sanctuary, had transformed into a space of understanding and connection. Tanya moved between serving coffee and listening to Dante, her presence steady and calm. Customers began to notice the unusual dynamic, but Tanya's demeanor set the tone. There was no fear, no spectacle, just a quiet affirmation that people could coexist in unexpected ways. By the afternoon, the tension began to ease. Dante had finished his coffee and was preparing to leave, but not before offering a nod of genuine gratitude. Tanya watched him mount his motorcycle, the roar of the engine breaking the calm of the street. She felt a mix of relief and anticipation, wondering if he would return and what the next interaction might bring. Tanya reflected on the morning and realized something important. Courage, empathy, and understanding didn't always come in dramatic gestures. Sometimes they were quiet, consistent choices made in moments when it would have been easier to look away. By protecting Dante and listening to him, she had created a ripple that might extend far beyond her cafe, changing the way people in her neighborhood perceived loyalty, courage, and humanity. The rest of the day continued with its usual rhythm, but Tanya couldn't shake the sense that things had shifted. The cafe had always been a place of comfort, but now it had also become a symbol of something larger, a reminder that compassion could bridge worlds, and that even the smallest act of courage could leave a lasting impression. As the sun set, Tanya locked the cafe and took a deep breath. The memory of Dante's visit lingered in her mind, not as a story of danger, but as a story of connection, trust, and the quiet power of standing up for what is right. She knew this was only the beginning. Her cafe had changed, her understanding of the world had deepened, and a bond had formed that would shape the days to come. In those quiet moments, Tanya felt ready for whatever might happen next. She had faced tension, fear, and uncertainty, and had come through with her values intact. That confidence, grounded in compassion and courage, was something she knew she would carry forward. The world outside might not always understand, but she understood herself, and that made all the difference. Days passed, and Tanya noticed a change in the rhythm of her cafe. The morning buzz felt different now, lighter yet tinged with a quiet anticipation. People still came in for coffee, for pastries, and for the warmth of her small, familiar space. But there was an unspoken curiosity in the air. Tanya had learned to expect the unexpected ever since Dante first appeared, and she moved through her day with a sense of calm vigilance. Balancing the ordinary with the unusual, Dante had become a regular presence, though never intrusive. He didn't come in every day, but enough that Tanya had started to recognize the subtle ways he adjusted to the cafe's routines. He didn't demand attention, and he never made anyone uncomfortable. Instead, he observed quietly, sometimes offering a nod or a smile to the staff, always respectful, always careful not to disturb the small world Tanya had built. Tanya had noticed small changes in herself too. She felt an unexpected sense of purpose and responsibility that extended beyond the walls of the cafe. Protecting Dante had opened her eyes to the power of simple human kindness and trust. It was more than just standing up to a tense situation. It was about understanding someone whose life was shaped by forces she could barely imagine. Every encounter was teaching her patience, empathy, and the quiet strength that comes from being present. One afternoon, Dante stayed longer than usual. He sipped his coffee slowly, watching people come and go. Tanya approached him carefully, mindful of not overwhelming him with questions or assumptions. She spoke gently, almost conversationally. "You've been coming here a lot lately," she said. "I hope it's not a problem." Dante looked up at her, his eyes carrying a mixture of thoughtfulness and mild amusement. "It's not a problem," he said. "It's different. People don't usually treat me like this." His voice was steady but carried a hint of vulnerability that Tanya hadn't expected. She realized then that this wasn't just a casual visit for him. It was a small refuge, a space where he could be more than the labels people put on him. The cafe grew quieter as the day went on. Tanya cleared tables and refilled pastries, but she kept glancing toward Dante. She noticed how he softened as he interacted with the environment. He smiled briefly at a customer who had dropped a napkin, nodded respectfully to a staff member carrying trays, and even laughed softly at a joke Tanya made about the early morning rush. "Everyone ignores an elderly woman with Alzheimer's at the bus stop until a black boy helps, and..." It was a side of him that most people would never see, a humanity carefully guarded behind a tough exterior. They started talking more openly that afternoon. Dante shared pieces of his life he had never spoken about to strangers, how loyalty and trust were central to his world, how mistakes had consequences that extended far beyond what outsiders could imagine, and how small acts of kindness were rare yet precious. Tanya listened, absorbing each word, recognizing the complexity of a life she could only glimpse from the surface. She didn't interrupt. She simply let him speak, creating a space where trust could grow naturally. As the conversation deepened, Tanya realized she was learning lessons that went far beyond the cafe. She was learning about resilience, about navigating a world that often judged people unfairly, and about the courage it takes to live authentically, even when the world expects something else. Dante's stories were sometimes difficult to hear, but they were always honest, and honesty carried a weight that demanded respect. Tanya also noticed how Dante seemed to be testing boundaries, not in a reckless way, but gently, to understand the limits of trust and acceptance. He would glance around the cafe, watch how the staff moved, or comment quietly on something she had arranged. Tanya responded with the same respect and calm, reinforcing a sense of safety and mutual understanding. Over time, these small exchanges built a connection that neither of them had anticipated. The bond between them began to extend beyond simple conversation. Dante started helping Tanya in subtle ways. He would hold doors open for customers, offer assistance when something was heavy or awkward to carry, and even quietly intervene when he noticed a small tension between staff members. His actions were measured, thoughtful, and unexpected. Tanya began to see that his presence was slowly transforming the cafe's atmosphere. It wasn't just about protection anymore. It was about respect, loyalty, and shared humanity. One morning, Tanya found herself watching Dante interact with a group of younger bikers who had come into the neighborhood. They were loud, rough, and intimidating at first glance, but Dante's calm presence seemed to steady them. He spoke quietly but with authority, guiding them without raising his voice, preventing a minor conflict from escalating. Tanya felt a mixture of awe and relief. She realized that there was a discipline and morality in his world that outsiders rarely understood. It wasn't chaos. It was structure, loyalty, and honor in its own form. Over the next few days, Dante began to open up even more. He shared stories about his childhood, about moments when he had felt completely misunderstood, and about choices he had made that had consequences he couldn't undo. Tanya offered empathy, sharing her own small struggles without trying to compare or minimize his experiences. She understood that connection was about listening, not fixing. By simply being present, she was helping him carry some of the weight he had been bearing alone. As their bond deepened, Tanya also started noticing changes in herself. She felt stronger, more confident in her ability to navigate tension and uncertainty. Protecting someone like Dante had taught her that courage wasn't about physical strength or confrontation. It was about presence, empathy, and the willingness to stand up for someone even when it was risky. Her perspective on the world was shifting, slowly, with every quiet interaction in her cafe. Customers and neighbors began noticing the subtle shift in the cafe as well. The atmosphere felt warmer, more accepting, and quietly energetic. People respected Dante's presence without fear, seeing him through the lens of Tanya's trust rather than their assumptions. Tanya realized that her small act of courage had started to ripple outward, changing perceptions one interaction at a time. She felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that trust and kindness could have such a profound effect. One afternoon, as Dante prepared to leave, he lingered at the doorway. He looked at Tanya with a seriousness that made her pause. "I didn't expect this," he said. "To find someone who doesn't judge me, who doesn't see me as just a label." Tanya smiled softly. "People are more than what they seem," she said simply. "Everyone deserves a chance to be seen for who they really are." Dante nodded slowly, absorbing the words. "I didn't know that was possible," he admitted. There was a quiet vulnerability in his voice, a trust that Tanya hadn't taken lightly. She realized that this bond, fragile yet strong, was forming the foundation of something that could last far beyond the walls of the cafe. As he rode away, Tanya felt a mix of emotions: relief that he was safe, pride in having stood up for him, and anticipation for what might come next. She knew this was only the beginning. Their connection had opened a door to understanding a world she had never imagined, and she was ready to explore it further. cautiously but with open heart and mind. That evening, Tanya reflected on the past few days. She thought about the courage it had taken to intervene, the trust that had been built, and the subtle changes in her neighborhood's perception. She understood that real change often started with small, human actions, moments of empathy, trust, and bravery that rippled outward quietly but powerfully. The cafe, once just a small corner of her life, had become a space of unexpected learning and growth. Tanya realized that the bond she was forming with Dante wasn't just about protecting him from immediate danger. It was about understanding, trust, and the power of human connection. She had opened her doors not just to a stranger, but to a lesson in life that would shape her forever. As she closed up for the night, Tanya felt a quiet sense of purpose. The cafe had always been her sanctuary, but now it had also become a place of empathy, courage, and connection. She knew challenges would come, but she felt ready to face them with the calm confidence that had carried her through the past days. And she knew deep down that this was only the start of a story that would continue to unfold in ways she could not yet imagine. The morning began quietly, almost deceptively so. Tanya unlocked her cafe and stepped inside, taking a deep breath of the familiar scent of coffee and baked bread. The streets outside were calm, the kind of calm that made her almost forget the tension of the past week. She moved through her routine, arranging pastries on trays, wiping down tables, and checking the espresso machine. Everything felt normal, and for a moment she allowed herself to enjoy the peaceful start. But something felt different. There was a subtle vibration in the air that Tanya couldn't immediately place. It wasn't a sound, not yet. It was a feeling, a sense that something was about to happen. She shook it off, thinking perhaps it was just her imagination, a leftover unease from previous days. Still, she kept a watchful eye on the street as she prepared the cafe for the morning rush. Then she heard it, a low, distant rumble that grew louder with each passing second. At first, she thought it was construction or heavy traffic. But as the sound intensified, it became unmistakably clear. Engines. Not one or two, but dozens coming closer, filling the street with a steady roar. Tanya froze for a moment, her heart racing. She had learned that sudden appearances from Dante's world could be overwhelming, and this felt monumental. Peering out the window, Tanya saw the first bikes crest the corner, leather jackets gleaming in the morning sun, and then more came, the line stretching down the block. She counted quickly in her head. There had to be nearly 200 bikers, all riding in formation, controlled yet intimidating. Tanya's first reaction was a flash of fear. This was not something she had expected. Her cafe, her little sanctuary, suddenly seemed fragile against such a massive, powerful presence. Before she could process more, the crowd began to slow as they approached the cafe. Tanya instinctively stepped toward the door, unsure whether to confront them, hide, or wait it out. But Dante was at the front, leading the group, and he raised a hand, signaling calm. Tanya realized immediately that this was not a threat. He looked at her, a reassuring nod in his eyes, and she understood. These bikers were here because of her. Her heart pounded as they began to dismount. They were careful, disciplined, moving with a strange kind of precision despite the apparent chaos of so many people. The roar of the engines gradually faded into a quiet hum of conversation, laughter, and greetings. Tanya stepped outside, keeping her distance but watching with awe. She had protected Dante once, and now, an entire community was here to show solidarity. The first biker approached her, a tall man with a gentle demeanor and a kind expression, holding a bouquet of flowers. "For you," he said simply. Tanya accepted them, feeling a mixture of shock and gratitude. Others followed with small gifts, a handcrafted plaque, baked goods, and even some memorabilia from the club. Tanya's eyes welled with tears she didn't expect. She had acted from instinct without expectation, and now she was witnessing the power of human gratitude in its most unexpected form. Dante stayed close, speaking quietly to Tanya. "They're here because of what you did," he said. "Not for me, for you. For standing up when it mattered. You showed respect and they respect that." Tanya nodded, barely able to find words. She had never imagined that her simple act of kindness and courage could ripple outward to touch so many lives, or that the world Dante belonged to could respond with such discipline and honor. The bikers began to mingle, forming a loose circle around the cafe. Tanya noticed how carefully they moved, making sure not to disrupt the neighborhood or scare any of the bystanders. Children peeked from behind their parents, curious and wide-eyed. Neighbors came out of their homes, hesitant but drawn by the spectacle. Tanya realized that her cafe had become a meeting point, a symbol, a place where two worlds had collided in a respectful, awe-inspiring way. Dante approached a few of his friends and spoke quietly, and Tanya could see the subtle discipline that marked their interactions. Despite their size, their reputation, and the tattoos and leather that often intimidated outsiders, they were measured and controlled. Tanya felt a strange reassurance. This was not chaos. This was a community showing respect in its own unique language. One biker stepped forward, a man with a calm presence, and addressed Tanya directly. "We've heard about what you did," he said. "You didn't have to step in, but you did. That takes courage. You've got our respect." Tanya felt her cheeks flush. She had acted out of instinct, not for recognition or praise. Yet here they were, acknowledging her bravery in a way that felt profoundly human. She thanked them quietly, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. As the bikers stayed, the atmosphere slowly shifted from tense to celebratory. Some shared stories, laughter breaking through the morning air. Dante remained close to Tanya, acting as a bridge between the bikers and the community. She watched him interact with them, the respect, the loyalty, the discipline, and began to understand more about the world she had briefly glimpsed before. It was intense, yes, but also deeply principled. These people followed codes she had never known, and in their way, they were demonstrating a form of humanity as raw and powerful as anything she had experienced. Throughout the morning, Tanya found herself moving through a mixture of awe, gratitude, and nervousness. She had never been surrounded by so many people from a world she barely understood, yet none of them posed harm. Instead, they brought a sense of connection, a recognition that her actions had mattered. She began to realize that courage often created its own gravity. By standing up for someone when it was difficult, she had drawn a community of people to her, not for fear or intimidation, but out of genuine respect. Children and neighbors approached cautiously, some holding flowers or small gifts of their own. Tanya guided them gently, introducing the bikers in a way that was calm and reassuring. The bikers responded with warmth and patience, showing a side of themselves that contrasted sharply with the rough exterior the world often fixated on. Tanya realized that this morning would leave a lasting impression, not just on her, but on everyone who witnessed it. Dante remained by her side, explaining quietly to her what each gesture meant, translating the language of loyalty, honor, and gratitude that was second nature to them. Tanya listened, fascinated, realizing how deeply structured and principled this world was. She felt honored to be accepted, not because of what she could provide materially, but because she had acted with integrity and courage. By the afternoon, the bikers had begun to disperse, but their presence left a lingering energy around the cafe. Tanya could still hear the occasional rumble of a motorcycle down the street, and she felt a quiet pride in what had transpired. She knew that what she had done had made a difference, and that respect was a currency more powerful than fear or intimidation. As the cafe settled back into its usual rhythm, Tanya reflected on the events. She realized that standing up for someone had created ripples far beyond the immediate moment. The bikers had arrived not to threaten but to honor, to recognize courage where it was due. And in doing so, they had taught her something profound, that human connection, trust, and respect could bridge worlds that often seemed irreconcilable. Dante came back briefly in the evening just to check in. He smiled at her, a soft, sincere expression. "They respect you," he said. "I respect you. What you did changed things not just for me, but for all of us." Tanya nodded quietly, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She hadn't expected recognition, yet she understood the depth of the moment. She had acted from instinct, and the world had responded in kind. As she closed the cafe that night, Tanya felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her little cafe had been at the center of something extraordinary, something that would be remembered for a long time. She knew that Dante and his friends would remain a part of her story, and that the lessons she had learned from them would continue to shape her life. Courage, she realized, was not just about bold actions in dangerous moments. Sometimes it was about quiet integrity, about standing up for what was right and trusting that the world would recognize it in its own way. She locked the doors, stepping outside into the cool night air. The street was quiet again, but the echoes of the morning's engines lingered in her mind. Tanya took a deep breath, feeling grateful and aware of the profound human connections that could emerge in the most unexpected places. Her cafe had become more than a place for coffee. It had become a symbol of trust, courage, and unexpected solidarity. And she knew that the story was far from over. The morning after the bikers had come to the cafe, Tanya woke up with a sense of calm she hadn't felt in days. The streets outside seemed quieter than usual, as if the neighborhood itself was recovering from the energy of the previous day. Tanya moved through her morning routine with a mixture of relief and reflection. She had faced something extraordinary, something that most people could never imagine happening to them, and yet she had handled it with her characteristic calm and courage. As she unlocked the cafe and stepped inside, the smell of fresh coffee and pastries greeted her. It was comforting, a reminder that despite everything, life still had its simple, steady rhythms. Tanya glanced around the small space she had built with her own hands and felt a sense of pride. The cafe had always been her sanctuary, a place of warmth and welcome, but now it had become a symbol of something much larger: trust, courage, and connection. The morning began to fill with the usual customers, many of whom were still buzzing about the events with the bikers. Some came in to share their own impressions, recounting what they had seen, while others simply watched Tanya with admiration. There was a new respect in their eyes, a recognition of her bravery, and Tanya felt both humbled and strengthened by it. She moved gracefully among the tables, serving coffee, taking orders, and maintaining the calm, steady presence that had always been her strength. Dante appeared again, his motorcycle rolling quietly to a stop outside. Tanya watched him approach, her heart lifting with a mix of anticipation and comfort. He had become more than a visitor. He was a presence that had altered the rhythm of her life in a profound way. She greeted him with a nod and a warm smile, offering him his usual seat by the window. He accepted, settling in with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the intensity the world often expected of him. Over the next few hours they spoke quietly, reflecting on the events of the past week. Dante shared his appreciation for how Tanya had handled herself and her cafe. He spoke about the respect she had earned, not just from him but from his entire community. "You didn't just protect me," he said. "You showed that courage and kindness still matter. People notice that even in ways you can't always see." Tanya nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Her actions had created ripples far beyond what she could have imagined, and those ripples had brought people together in ways she had never expected. As the morning continued, Tanya noticed subtle changes in the cafe itself. The staff were more confident, moving through their tasks with a quiet pride. Customers seemed more at ease, sharing smiles and small conversations that carried a newfound warmth. Even the neighbors walking by seemed to regard the cafe differently, their glances filled with respect and curiosity. Tanya realized that her small act of courage had transformed not just her own life, but the lives of those around her. Later in the day, Dante introduced Tanya to a few other members of his group who had been involved in the visit the previous day. They came in quietly, respectful of the cafe's atmosphere, and greeted Tanya with warmth and gratitude. Tanya felt a mixture of awe and humility as she interacted with them. These were people whose world was often misunderstood, whose presence could intimidate many, yet here they were, showing respect and appreciation for something as simple as standing up for someone in need. Tanya noticed that her perception of the world was shifting. She had always believed in kindness and fairness, but now she saw how powerful these qualities could be in unexpected situations. Courage was not just about confrontation or strength. It was about integrity, empathy, and the willingness to act even when it was risky. By protecting Dante, she had shown that these qualities could resonate far beyond her immediate surroundings, creating connections that transcended fear and judgment. Throughout the day, the cafe remained a hub of quiet energy and reflection. Tanya moved among the tables serving coffee, listening to stories from customers and occasionally exchanging brief words with Dante and his friends. The atmosphere was relaxed yet vibrant, filled with the sense that something important had happened here, something that would leave a lasting,